Greetings, Father Leo, back again. And this is part two of my interview of Leo Talks with Mark Woollard, who has talked somewhat about his spiritual journey. And today we're going to pursue it just a little further and develop even more because of the interesting spiritual journey that he has been on. And it is very much to do with spirituality. And so today I welcome Mark back to part two. We'll pick it up from where we left off, Mark, if that's fine with you.
Perfect.
So I wonder if you could tell us about that initial experience that you had when you were about 11 years old, and probably a little bit reluctant to talk about it at that age.
I had one Sunday afternoon attending a church service, a United Church service, where I just felt this inner glow come over me sometime during the service. I can't remember whether it was singing, during preaching, during whatever the activity was. And I went home still feeling this glow, and by about mid-afternoon, it had faded away. And I thought, what was that? Had not experienced that before in that way in church, and I didn't understand it, so I didn't bring it up with anybody, my father, mother, nobody. I just sort of sat on it and pondered it for a little while, but not too long, because I went out and played the Sunday afternoon with my friends, and the whole experience had disappeared. But I guess in retrospect, the thing that strikes me is that some churches aren't very good at talking about personal spiritual experiences, maybe afraid that it's going to engender ego involvement. It may get into territory that a staff member at a church wouldn't want to get into or talk about. And I think it's a failing of churches generally not to promote people's experience, which I'm getting ahead of myself, but it's one of the attractions of your weekly Zoom Mass was your invitation of people to share their experiences and to not discount what's going on in each person's spiritual journey.
Yeah, and I think I identify with you. I think I've told the story when I was about the same age as you, probably 10 or 11. We had the tall pines, and I built a little lean-to there, and I sat there on the stump, little stream flowing by, chipmunks coming out, birds singing, the whistling of the wind on the pines. As a kid, I sat there, and I used to sit there by the hour, and then I forgot about it. But it was only later in life I recaptured it and realized that it was some kind of a mystical experience. And I have a sense that really that's what you're talking about is some kind of a mystical experience at about age 12. And then nothing much from that till you missed. You were very fortunate to miss a young lady, Sue McLaughlin, an Irish Catholic, and fell in love, and bingo, your life really grew from there. A lot of growing took place spiritually, and maybe we could talk about that.
Yeah, there's no question we were on a very similar path, and it was mutual TM meditator friends who had drawn us together. And it didn't take too long for us to realize, hey, we want to do life together as a married couple. And the interesting thing in the wedding ceremony in Montreal, where we got married, somebody else brought this to my attention. I hadn't put it quite this way, but on the altar were three unique individuals. We had a Catholic priest, Father Jerry Sinnell, my father in the background, who had a part in the Catholic liturgy that day at that church in Montreal, my wife and myself. And a third person came into the liturgy. He was a Quaker mystic who had died in the 40s, but he was there through my dad reading a classic piece of writing that he had put in his book, Testament of Devotion. His name is Thomas Kelly, was the Quaker mystic, and his book, Testament of Devotion, really opened up for me an understanding of what the mystical path can involve and how you can facilitate it, how you can participate with it, and grow as a result of that. And so here were these three religious leaders in book form and two in person cementing our marriage. And it seemed like just such a perfect kind of what's the word, launch of this married life with Sue.
Yeah, and and I guess for me to see the blending that's back in those days, as you know, it was most unusual to be able to get a Catholic priest and a minister in the same building, you know, and for the three of them to come together there was remarkable. And the other thing I noticed, Mark, very clearly, was your haircut.
I had hair.
Yeah, it was a nice haircut. I thought, I hope Sue appreciates that you had a nice haircut that day. But then I noticed that very quickly after marrying Sue, um, because she was on a path with the Camino and all the rest of it, but apparently the two of you got attracted by and involved in centering prayer. Could you tell us about that, how that um, influenced your life?
After a long time of not regular church attendance, we had kids, and the kids, we wanted to have a church experience. So Sue and I and the kids would go off to a Catholic church where I was uninvited to participate in communion, felt the liturgy didn't connect with me. And so not long after, I stopped going. And then the kids said, "Hey, wait a minute," when they got old enough to say that, "if dad can stay home, why can't we stay home?" And so we had to find a compromised church. And I said to Sue, "But you'll never leave the Catholic Church." And she looked at me right in the eye and she said, "Try me." And we did. And we moved to an Anglican church, which is the in-betweener kind of between United and Catholic for many of us. And we thrived there as a church. We couldn't talk about TM there, but carried on with our practice. And then there was a church subsequent to that. About 10 years later, we ended up in another United church in Brampton when we moved. And that's where Sue felt led, and I followed right behind her lead in shifting our daily spiritual practice from TM to centering prayer that was created by several Catholic priests, but one in particular, Thomas Keating, was kind of the architect of promoting and teaching it around the world and bringing it into other faiths. In fact, not just the Christian world. So yeah, that became our daily practice. Probably starting in around 2012, 13, thereabouts.
So, again, as a practitioner of centering prayer, again, how is that impacted? How have you grown spiritually? How has that fed your spirituality since you've been already at a good start of that? When that mystical experience when you're about 11 years old, you're building on it with transcendental meditation, now centering prayer. How is all that working within your own spirit?
As I understand the spiritual growth process, Christ, the Christ Spirit, the Spirit of God, lives within all of humanity, all people, as Richard Rohr would espouse. And our challenge is to open up to the truth of that presence in us. And what's standing in the way of being open to it is our baggage, are the traumas, are the belief systems, are the things we've done in life, which we then blame ourselves for, or hold ourselves back, or feel unworthy, or all that kind of stuff. We're all carrying a collection of stuff we don't even know is there. And what either TM or centering prayer, any of these meditation practices do is really just let the system purify, let go of that stuff. And sometimes we need psychological counseling or help with working out some big trauma or some big issue that we're carrying with us. But sometimes this stuff can just dissolve and the spirit inside can just do its own healing without us hardly realizing what's going on. And only when we then encounter, hey, how come I didn't get upset in that situation that usually upset me? Well, that issue in you, in me, had been resolved. And so it becomes easier to just go with that flow of what Paul would call the gifts of the Spirit: love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, gentleness, self control. All of those spiritual gifts of the Spirit are what the Spirit of God in us gives us and is within us. It's the light within, the being within, the God within, and yet our humanness gets in the way. And so centering prayer helps us let go of our human stuff, the baggage, and let more of the light shine in.
So it's really awakening the light, waking you up and to seeing more clearly the Christ within you and within others. And is this something you do every day, centering prayer? Is it a regular spiritual exercise? And if so, what other exercises do you have of a spiritual nature that are meant to feed and grow your becoming?
Yeah, it's a regular daily practice, even more diligently by Sue than by me. She will often remind me that, I haven't done my afternoon meditation or whatever. She's diligent about that. But you said spiritual nature. Well, walking in nature, we have a path beside the Etobicoke Creek Trail, which is about 4 houses and a baseball field away from us. And we can go for miles up or down along the Etobicoke Creek Trail with forest, with fields, with flowers, with birds, and all of that kind of stuff. And I find, and Sue even more finds, walking in nature and sometimes not talking at all, just being together walking on that path is so rejuvenating and connecting of us to the natural environment where God is equally present in a different way. I mean, the plant life and the animal life in nature
Mm.
aren't carrying around self reflectiveness in the way us human beings are, but there's still the presence of God, the consciousness of God, the life giving force of God in those things, and it draws us more openly to it.
So, do you find yourself living with more awareness of the presence of God? Uh, Not just sporadic, but on a continuum of some kind. Are you more aware that you're walking with God and God is present moment by moment?
Yeah, I wish it was that continuous, Leo. I mean, I still let my humanness, my proclivity to react with judgment or anger at situations or things, which can kind of block the flow or get in the way of the flow of that presence. But when I'm at peace, when I'm not troubled by something right in my face, then yeah, that presence is pretty regularly there, and it's especially there as what Richard Rohr calls the hour of the wolf. I'm often awake between 3 and 5 a.m. in the morning when my human personality, my ego is kind of as settled down as it ever gets in a 24-hour period. And in that 2 hour or hour of the wolf, as he calls it, I'm open to this presence, and it's a deeply connected feeling. And sometimes I don't want to come out of it. I want to just stay there. But there's a day coming, and I got things to do, and so on.
Yeah, but there is that sense of becoming more aware of the presence of God and the action of God as well. I'm wondering, Ilya Dilio in the Hours of the Universe talks about when one becomes a mystic, it's that kind of search for and growth into God, then it becomes birthing God. I wonder if that idea strikes you that somehow, in the midst of all of this, that you and other mystics are birthing God in our particular society, if you will, or in our world, or in your village, town, what have you.
Well, in my own case, Leo, and it certainly applies to me specifically, and I wouldn't generalize this for other people, but my facilitating of small groups, and I've got 3 on the go right now that meet weekly. When I'm engaged listening intently to what people are sharing in a small group discussion about a matter that relates to life, which may have a big S spiritual label on it. It may be just life with a
Yeah.
capital L, because Spirit's with us in all of our life. And when I'm hearing people and when I get a sense there's something of God in what they are saying in that moment, I'm seized by it and I'm inclined to just dig a little deeper, draw a little more out, both for the person speaking about where they are in their life and for the benefit of those who are there in the same Zoom room listening to what's being said. And I'm convinced there are days when that Spirit of God is leading people to say things that I'd never anticipated. And because it strikes a chord with me, I'm inclined to want to help it strike a chord with others and resonate that same Spirit's presence in other people in the room. And we all know the experience of being in a room where some negative person walks into a room, a meeting, a place, whatever, maybe out in public, maybe in a workplace, and that negativity comes into the room and it just ruffles everything. It disturbs everything, and nobody feels connected or loved or at peace for the time being. But the opposite is happening in these small groups. When people are zeroed in, centered in on the spirit within them and their life's experience, it resonates with other people and that strengthens that presence in others' experience. And it's like a multiplying effect. It's like tuning forks all in the same room at the same vibration, just starting to resonate and raise people up. And I think that's always been the purpose of gatherings, of religious gatherings, is to try to create that through song, through prayers, through scripture, through liturgy, and so on. And sometimes it works brilliantly. But my role in life seems to be to try to encourage people to speak that experience, share it, and by doing so, raise other people up.
But I hear you saying group form. I have a sense of big progress that you're making, Mark. You talked earlier about church and the various church denominations. I have a sense, though, that something new is being born here because it's probably, you don't call it a Catholic or United or an Anglican group. It's more the people of God. Yeah, I get a sense moving away from tribalism.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I mean, the classic is Richard Rohr's book, The Universal Christ, which for me in 2018 became the new Bible of understanding that, yes, Jesus walked this earth in human flesh 2,000 years ago, and fully embodied this Christ spirit in walking the earth in human form. But the Christ spirit was there at the beginning, was there at creation, was there in the Big Bang, and that Christ has been incarnated into all of creation. And so that's not tribal Jesus, that's this Christ spirit that is universal and everywhere. And by universal, I don't mean everybody just blissfully gets into a joyful heavenly experience in this life. No, we've all got stuff to work out. We're all accountable for the choices and decisions we make in our life, about how we treat people, how we engage with the world around us and the people we interact with. So we've all got work to do, but meanwhile, there's this presence that is there for all of us. And so to put a tribal label on a religion, on a spiritual practice, ends up excluding people and putting people in camps. And then camps become at war with one another and filled with animosity or hate or exclusion or all those kinds of things. And that's the opposite of what Jesus, in his fully embodied Christ spirit, was teaching and preaching as he walked the earth. He was there to basically put his arms out wide and say, all are in, all are welcome. You are all in my loving spirit. And please, set aside your weapons, set aside your animosities, set aside your hostilities and come on into this tent of love, forgiveness, grace, mercy, joy. I mean, that's one thing we often forget as Christians. We get a bit too serious and dour, and we forget that there's joy and laughter in being in this flow of the Spirit of God. I think God is chuckling, not maybe audibly, but is chuckling a lot of the time in a sense of, like it's not taking everything so darn seriously.
Seriously. It's kind of interesting, Mark. What are your comments on? They did a survey recently, and the UK is the Anglican Church is the church of the state, eh? But anyway, they did a survey there in the UK, and the Anglican priests then were declaring that the UK is no longer a Christian country. And if you read Cohen this morning in today's Star, he says the same thing about Canada. And he says that's a good thing because he sees something else. What are your comments on that kind of a thing?
Yeah, I think letting go of the old structures, the old religious structures and belief systems and practices and buildings, letting go of those is painful. And so a lot of folks see those things dissolving and they don't see what's coming in its place. And what's coming in its place is a spirit of harmony, connectedness, oneness, where all human beings are part of this same God's loving spirit that is calling us and inviting us to be in connection and service of one another, working together, not against one another. And I think what Cohen has already begun to see is the truth of that. That is, letting go of the old stuff is creating room for this new realization, this new awareness, this new connectedness. And there's still people though who are like, white knuckle hanging on to the old, those Anglican bishops, whatever, in the UK, saying, no, no, we're losing something and feeling like the world is falling apart. And they can't yet see, but they will. They can't yet see that that's being replaced by this openness of flow of love and connection, which God is. And young people are seeing that more readily. Young people aren't flocking to the old institutional religions. Young people are going into the flow of peace and connectedness generally. I mean, it's not true of every single human being, but we're moving in that direction. I have great hope that as the institutional structures, and not just religions, I mean, it's happening too in economic structures and in legal structures and so on. Things are starting to fall apart, but it's because it needs to be replaced by a new spirit of harmony and grace and love. Ultimately, it's love and connectedness. We're all one.
And that's the thing that Cohen stresses in the article in the Star this morning. He said, the simplicity of it, which is love God and love one another, and to really do that, and not get tied up in a lot of theology and defensiveness and competition, but just living that. And he certainly sees that a lot of positive signs in our country, in Canada, where he sees, for example, with the environment, more people interested in it, social justice, feeding the hungry, healthcare system, and he sees so many ways in which the spirit is moving in the hearts of institutions or systems to make a better world for people and nature and for creation. So even though he kind of says, yeah, the institutions are diminishing, and it is diminished, something else is growing. What are your comments on that?
Well, when I see my two grandkids who are 7 and 5 now, and their embracing of one another, of other kids, not seeing color, not seeing difference, not buying into a lot of stuff that maybe as a 7-year-old I would have maybe started to buy into in terms of difference and separation. I don't see them going down that same path, but it's partly because their parents, my daughter in particular, has been intentionally open about the truth of this oneness, about how love and forgiveness and serving one another, caring for one another, respecting one another, how that comes first and foremost. So, with that as an example, I see that as hopeful. On a societal level, I mean, there are days or weeks, Leo, when I'll see the news and I'll think, ah, there's an example of the positive direction. And then the news media, which don't like to spend a whole lot of time on positive stuff because it doesn't get people all exercised and staying with the channel, they click off or they change the channel or don't keep watching. You don't get enough of that. And I think over time, more and more of that sort of shift will become evident to people, maybe not in the media, but at least in their daily experience of interacting with people and life in their community.
One of the things I've seen, and again, I go back to I guess it's my third Bible now. Nature's my first, and then the written one, and then the Toronto Star. But it seemed to be writing a week ago and again this weekend on the evangelical um, conservatism and trying to impose uh, their values, particularly on schools, and especially in the area of the LGBT people. And in other words, what are your thoughts about the things like the moral majority and those kind of things? What are your thoughts about those?
That's pretty tricky territory. I mean, I'm a 73-year-old, only slightly younger than you, Leo. Um, and I come from an age and an era where all that gender identification and so on was like either not understandable or even scary for me as a teenager, as a 20-year-old, 30-year-old. I didn't even want to engage in discussion about homosexuality or about LGBT and just gender identity in general. It was kind of under the covers, or didn't mean that as a pun. It was sort of undercurrent and it was out of sight and out of mind. And all of that is coming to the fore now. And I think we have to face it, and I think it comes back to my philosophy is every soul on earth, every human being has a journey. And in that journey are lessons to be learned. And each one of us has to go through stuff and ultimately get through stuff till we've grown as far as we can grow in this human existence that we've been gifted with. And no one person can tell another person what is the specific path they need to take. So if some teenager is wrestling with their gender identity, I don't want to impose or have the state through policy or whatever impose this is how you will identify yourself. I'm saying as long as you're not harming another person, you're not doing harm in the world, you need to let that person work through their own issues. We're too quick to try to want to judge people and push people in a particular direction. And while it creates maybe a little bit of chaos in how we organize society and activity, like whose bathroom can you use, for example, um, I know it's complicated, but I think we need to give people freedom of choice in their working out of their life.
Would you tend to say that as people we're afraid of chaos?
Sure. We want certainty. We want predictability. We want to know what tomorrow's going to be, and we know what we want out of tomorrow. We've got desires, we've got intentions, we've got purpose in life, and maybe career path, and so on. And we know what we want. But I think what we're called more and more in this time of change and transition is to live more fully in the present moment because the presence of God is here in this present moment. As Jesus said, don't worry about tomorrow. You've got enough to worry about today. Look at the lilies of the field. Like clearly Jesus is in the moment and interacting with people right in that moment. And I think that still applies today. I think we're too caught up with getting all worked up and anxious about the tomorrows and the planning for the future. But that's not to say there isn't a role for people to play in government and policy and organizations to do planning and to do all that. I'm not saying just throw caution to the wind, but I think our greatest attention should be in this moment today, right now. You know, as Baba Ramdas said back in the 70s, wasn't it be here now? I think it's a lot of wisdom in that.
Yeah. And I think too that the more we study physics, science, the more we realize that the very nature of evolution is chaos. And as you said, for the humans to try to impose control on chaos is going to create more chaos.
Yeah, yeah, I think we mess we muck it up even more. Chaos needs to process through and not be corralled and restrained and contained. There have been too many examples of where uh, humans' inclination to weigh in and control things has the opposite effect.
I wonder the last question I'd like to ask you about, Mark, is about science. Um, we know it's been a struggle for some religious people to accept science, or when I made a reference earlier, creation as the first Bible. How are you with that? What do you see when you think of religion and science, spirituality and evolution? What are some of your thoughts around the combination of science with religion or spirituality?
Well, I think slowly science will come to realize that consciousness, the unified field of consciousness, in fact, is the ultimate reality. And that the idea that there is a spiritual world and a material world, we're going to see scientists move past that duality and come to a recognition of the common ground. Um, but how and who and that's going to unfold, not quite clear. I know Ilya Dilio is big in that area. Einstein had glimmers of that. Oppenheimer had understandings of this deeper spiritual, energetic connectedness that science up until then had not really embraced. I mean, there's still people who say scientists who say consciousness doesn't exist, and when your brain dies, you're gone, it's all over, and they have no clue, but they will. They will they will pass through to the other side, and it'll be, well, varying reactions, but it'll be, oh my God, how come I didn't know this back then?
Yeah, I wish I had it. Yeah. Well, that's interesting because I think there's a big topic there, because um, obviously the scientists are revealing an awful lot of information, knowledge, and the sacredness of everything and the oneness of everything. So, a lot to be said. So, Mark, you've told us an interesting story, part one, part two. Is there anything you want to add before we leave?
I would just say that given all my experience with various religious connections and leaders and people, be open. I would invite everyone to be open to hearing a new message, a new voice, and take it internally and evaluate for oneself. Is this where I need to move next? Is this understanding where I might grow more in my connection with God and with others? And I think for each of us, the paths are different. The people who will help us move from one phase or stage to another phase of or stage of growth, it will all be unique, all be different. And so, one, don't judge other spiritual leaders who you don't resonate with. But secondly, where you're feeling resonance, there's a reason for that. And it's my advice to grab onto that for as long as that part of your journey needs that connection.
Okay. Well, I want to thank you, Mark, for being here and having us talk with us. And you talk about people who somehow inspire us on, and you've certainly been a source of inspiration to me. And I've really been a delight to know you and for you to share so openly with your journey. I'm deeply grateful, and I'm sure the people who watch this on Leo Talks, I'm sure they too will gain from our conversation. So I say thank you, Mark, and God bless.
God bless you.
Okay, bye bye.
Bye.